3 seats in the front row sat empty, one for my mother, one for my father, and one for my best friend. They were not missing. They were deliberately absent. 12 minutes ago, a text confirmed their abandonment. As my husband's firefighter brothers filled the silence behind me, I gripped an anonymous card that warned me not to sign anything. I finally understood that this was not just a funeral. It was the opening move of a hunt. My name is Zoe Owens, and today I buried my husband while staring at 3 empty chairs in the front row. I am 33 years old, too young to be a widow, and certainly too old to be abandoned by the people who brought me into this world. The chapel smelled of lilies and floor wax, that suffocating, cloying scent that is specific to funeral homes in the Midwest. It was a heavy, stagnant air that seemed to press against my chest, making every inhalation a conscious effort. I stood near the casket, my hands clasped in front of me so tightly that my knuckles had turned a bleached white. The room was full. Evan had been a firefighter, a paramedic, a man who saved lives for a living, and the turnout reflected that. The pews were a sea of dress blue uniforms, polished brass buttons, and grim, respectful faces, but my eyes kept drifting back to the 3 chairs I had reserved directly to my left. They were the most important seats in the house, draped with small velvet signs that read, "Family." One was for my father, Richard, one was for my mother, Darlene, and one was for Madeline Price, the woman I had called my best friend since our freshman year of college, the woman who had stood beside me as my maid of honor in this very town 5 years ago. Now, those seats were just gaps in the line, gaping holes that screamed of rejection. People were whispering. I could feel their pity physically, like a damp heat on the back of my neck. They were wondering where my support system was. They were wondering why Zoe Owens was standing alone next to a mahogany casket while the people who shared her DNA were nowhere to be found. I kept my chin high, fixing my gaze on the spray of white roses atop the coffin, refusing to turn around and acknowledge the murmurs. I checked my phone for the 10th time in 5 minutes, 12 minutes before the service was scheduled to begin. A text message had lit up my screen. It was from Madeline. I had expected her to be here an hour early. I had expected her to be fixing my hair, handing me tissues, and running interference with overzealous mourners. That was what best friends did. That was the unwritten contract of sisterhood we had signed over cheap wine and textbooks more than a decade ago. Instead, I got a gray bubble of text. Emergency. Can't make it. So sorry. Z. That was it. No phone call. No details. No panicked voice message explaining that she had been in a car accident or that her apartment was on fire. Just a vague, cowardly noun. Emergency. It was a word people used when they wanted to shut down questions. It was a wall. I stared at the message, reading it over and over until the words blurred. Madeline lived 20 minutes away. She had no children. Her job as a marketing consultant was flexible. What kind of emergency prevents you from attending the funeral of your best friend's husband? I felt a vibration in my palm again. But it was not a new message. It was a voicemail notification from 20 minutes ago that I had missed while speaking to the funeral director. I lifted the phone to my ear, turning slightly away from the gathering crowd. I needed to hear my mother's voice. I needed to hear that they were close, that they were just parking, that they were running through the doors right now to hold me up. The voicemail clicked on. My mother's voice was thin, tinny, and strangely devoid of background noise. "Zoe, it is Mom. Listen, we are having car trouble. The engine just started making this terrible noise on the interstate. Your father says we risk blowing the transmission if we keep going. We have to turn around and get it towed to the mechanic. We are just sick about it. We will call you later." The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. My blood ran cold. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in the chapel. Car trouble. My parents drove a 2-year-old Lexus. My father was meticulous, bordering on obsessive, about vehicle maintenance. He kept a logbook in the glove compartment. The idea that their car would suffer a catastrophic failure on the one day their daughter needed them most was statistically improbable. But even if it were true, We lived in the age of ride-sharing. We lived in a world of rental cars and taxis. If your car breaks down on the way to a funeral, you do not turn around and go home. You call an Uber, you call a friend, you walk if you have to. You find a way because showing up is the only thing that matters. Turning around was a choice. A terrifying clarity began to settle over me. It was not the chaotic fog of grief I'd been living in for the past week. This was sharp. It was jagged. I looked at the empty chairs again. They were not stuck in traffic. They were not waiting for a tow truck. They were not in the emergency room. They were staying away on purpose. Why? The question bounced around my skull. Was the grief too much for them? My parents had never been particularly warm towards Evan. They thought he was too blue-collar, too risky, not enough of a provider for their daughter, but they were sticklers for appearances. Public image meant everything to the Caldwells. Skipping the funeral would look terrible to their friends, to the community. The shame of absence usually outweighed their personal discomfort. So why risk the gossip and Madeline? She had been at my house 3 days ago, crying on my shoulder, helping me sort through Evan's medication bottles. She had been the picture of a supportive friend. What had changed in 72 hours? I closed my eyes and a memory surfaced. Unbidden. It was from 2 weeks ago. Evan was in the hospital bed we had set up in the living room, his body ravaged by the cancer that had moved with such terrifying speed from his lungs to his brain. He was lucid that night, a rare window of clarity between the morphine doses. He had gripped my hand, his grip surprisingly strong, his calloused thumb rubbing over my knuckles. "Zoe," he had whispered, his voice rasping like dry leaves. "You have a big heart. You trust people because you are good. But you need to listen to me. I am listening. Ev," I had said, trying to smile for him. "If anyone hurts you," he said, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that frightened me. "If things get bad after I'm gone, I have prepared for it. Do not let them run you over." At the time, I thought he was talking about the sadness. I thought he was talking about the crushing weight of the world without him. I thought he was telling me to be strong against the depression. But standing here in this cold chapel, looking at the void where my family should have been, I realized he might have been talking about something else entirely. I have prepared for it. Prepared for what? Evan. A heavy hand landed gently on my shoulder. I flinched, snapping back to the present. It was Captain Miller, Evan's station commander. He was a large man, built like a wall of granite, with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much tragedy to be anything but kind. "We are here. Zoe," he said softly. "The boys. We are going to fill in the front. Is that all right?" I looked past him. The entire crew of Station 42 was standing at attention. They saw the empty seats. They saw the humiliation I was facing, and without saying a word, they were stepping up to shield me from it. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice cracking for the first time that day. "Please," Captain Miller nodded once. He signaled the men, with a synchronized shuffle of polished leather boots. The firefighters moved forward. They bypassed the second and third rows and filled the 3 empty seats I had reserved. Captain Miller took the seat meant for my father. A young rookie named Davis took the seat meant for my mother, and the station lieutenant took the seat meant for Madeline. They sat with their backs straight, their hats resting on their knees, a solid wall of navy blue effectively erasing the visual evidence of my family's betrayal. It was a kindness that almost broke me. The contrast between the loyalty of these men, who were bound to Evan only by work and duty, and the abandonment of my own flesh and blood, was so sharp it felt like a physical blow. The organ music began to swell, signaling the start of the service. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the shaking in my hands, just as I turned to take my own seat. A young man from the funeral home staff appeared at my elbow. He looked terrified to interrupt, his face pale. "Mrs. Owens," he whispered. "Yes, this just arrived for you. The delivery driver said it was urgent. He insisted I give it to you before the service started." He held out a small, circular wreath. It was simple, made of woven ivy and dark purple dried flowers. It was beautiful, but strange. It was not a typical sympathy arrangement. There was no banner, no ribbon saying, "Beloved husband." There was just a small, cream-colored envelope tucked into the branches. I took the wreath, confused. "Who is it from?" There was no name on the order. "Ma'am, just instructions to put it in your hands immediately." The young man retreated, disappearing into the shadows. I stood there, the organ music vibrating in the floorboards beneath my feet. I should have waited. I should have put the wreath down on the table with the guest book and opened the card later. But an instinct, primal and screaming, told me to open it now. I handed the wreath to Captain Miller, who took it without question. I tore open the small envelope. Inside was a single index card. The handwriting was jagged, hurried, written in thick black marker. It was not a condolence. It was not a Bible verse. It was not a message of love. There were only 3 words. "Do not sign anything." I stared at the words. The ink looked fresh. "Do not sign anything." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that drowned out the solemn music. I looked at the card. Then I looked at the text from Madeline on my phone. Emergency. I looked at the transcription of my mother's voicemail. Turning back, I looked at the casket where my husband lay cold and silent. A terrible, cold logic clicked into place. My parents were not missing because of a car engine. Madeline was not missing because of a vague emergency. They were not here because they could not face me. Or perhaps, they were not here because being here would slow them down. If they were grieving, they would be here. If they were broken, they would be here to lean on me. People who are paralyzed by sadness do not coordinate their absence. This was coordinated. This was timed. My husband's voice echoed in my head again. I have prepared for it. I looked at the card in my hand again. Do not sign anything. Sign what insurance papers? The deed to the house. The death certificate. Whatever it was, someone knew what was happening. Someone knew enough to send a warning to a funeral. I crushed the card in my fist, the sharp edges of the paper digging into my palm. The physical pain was grounding. It gave me something to focus on other than the gaping hole in my chest. The priest stepped up to the podium. He began to speak about Evan's life, about his sacrifice, about the tragedy of a life cut short at 34. The room bowed its head in prayer, but I did not bow my head. I kept my eyes open. I scanned the back of the room, looking for a face I did not recognize, looking for the person who sent the wreath. But there were only familiar faces, all masked in solemnity. I squeezed the card tighter, until my fingernails cut into my skin. My family did not leave me alone at my husband's funeral because they were weak. They left me alone because they were busy. They thought I was just a grieving widow, blinded by tears, vulnerable and soft. They thought I would be so crushed by their absence that I would be easy to manipulate when they finally decided to show up. They thought today was the end of something. I looked at the heavy oak doors at the back of the chapel. Somewhere out there, my parents and my best friend were doing something they did not want me to know about. They were wrong. Today was not an ending. As the priest intoned the words, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, I realized the truth. The tears drying on my cheeks were no longer just for Evan. They were the last drops of my naivety. This was not a farewell. This was the opening of a gate. I was not just being mourned, I was being hunted. To understand the hollow ache of those empty chairs, you have to understand the noise that filled the room before the silence took over. You have to understand Evan. We did not meet in a way that would make a good romantic comedy trailer. There was no slow-motion glance across a crowded room or a charming misunderstanding over a library book. We met because I was running late for a 12-hour shift at Kestrel Point Medical Center, and I was clumsy. It was a Tuesday morning in November. 5 years ago, I was vibrating with caffeine withdrawal and stress. I barreled into the small coffee shop 2 blocks from the hospital entrance, blindly ordering a triple-shot latte while simultaneously trying to tie my scrub pants and check my pager. When the barista handed me the cup, I spun around too fast. I slammed a scalding hot cup of dark roast right into the center of a stranger's chest. The liquid exploded. Brown sludge soaked into his gray t-shirt instantly. splashing up onto his neck. I froze, horrified. My first instinct was to grab napkins and start dabbing at him, which only made it worse. I was mortified. I waited for the yelling. I waited for the look of disgust that usually accompanies a ruined morning. But the yelling never came. Instead, a large, warm hand gently caught my wrist, stopping my frantic napkin scrubbing. I looked up. He had kind eyes. That was the first thing I noticed. They were the color of slate, crinkled at the corners, and they were laughing. He looked down at his ruined shirt, then back at me. "Nice aim," he said. His voice was deep, a steady rumble that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. "I think you actually improved the shirt. I was never a fan of this gray anyway." I stammered an apology, offering to pay for dry cleaning, offering to buy him a new shirt, offering my soul in exchange for forgiveness. He just shook his head. "I am Evan," he said, "and unless you are a burn unit nurse, you are going to be late for work. Go. I will survive a little coffee." He was a firefighter. I learned that later. But it made sense in retrospect. He had that specific stillness that first responders develop. The ability to stand in the center of chaos, even chaos as small as a spilled latte, and lower the temperature of the room just by breathing. I saw him again 3 days later. He was bringing a patient into the ER where I was rotating through triage. He was wearing his uniform this time, the navy blue looking sharp and authoritative. He winked at me as he wheeled the gurney past, pointing to his clean shirt. We went for dinner the next night. By the third date, we both knew. It wasn't just the chemistry, though that was there, electric and undeniable. It was the shared language of our lives. I worked in the ICU. He worked on a rig. We both lived in the spaces where other people's worst days happened. We both knew what it was like to come home at 3 a.m, smelling like antiseptic and smoke, carrying the weight of a life that had slipped away despite our best efforts, with other men. I had to explain why I was quiet. I had to explain why I didn't want to talk, or why a certain song on the radio made me cry. With Evan, I never had to explain. He would just pull me into his chest on the sofa, his arms like steel bands, and hold me until the shaking stopped. We were soldiers in the same invisible war, finding sanctuary in each other's ceasefire. The proposal came 18 months later. There were no flash mobs. There was no hidden photographer. It was a Tuesday again. We were in his small apartment, eating takeout Chinese food on the floor because he had not bought a dining table yet. He put his fork down and looked at me. The air in the room shifted, becoming heavy and charged. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It was not a diamond the size of a skating rink. It was his grandmother's ring, a modest sapphire set in worn gold. "Zoe," he said. He did not get down on one knee. He just leaned forward, looking at me with that terrifyingly open honesty. "I am a civil servant. I am never going to be rich. I cannot promise you a mansion or a summer home in the Hamptons, but I promise you this. I promise to show up. Every day, good or bad, I will be there." I said yes before he even finished the sentence. I did not want a mansion. I wanted him. My parents, however, had different priorities. When I brought Evan home to meet Richard and Darlene Caldwell, the temperature in the dining room dropped 10 degrees. My father sat at the head of the table, cutting his steak with precise, surgical movements. He asked Evan about his pension plan before he asked him where he grew up. "So, you drive the truck?" my father asked, not looking up from his plate. "I am a lieutenant, actually," Evan said, his voice polite but firm. "I run the crew, and I am a certified paramedic." My mother swirled her wine, her eyes scanning Evan's off-the-rack blazer with a microscopic judgment. "It is noble work, certainly," she said, using the word noble like it was a synonym for charity. "But Zoe is used to a certain stability. We always imagined she would end up with a doctor, someone at the hospital with a bit more longevity." Evan did not flinch. He reached under the table and squeezed my hand. "I have plenty of longevity, Mrs. Caldwell," he said, "and I plan to spend all of it making your daughter happy." Later, in the kitchen, my mother cornered me while I was loading the dishwasher. "He is rough." "Zoe," she hissed, He is a nice boy for a fling. But for a husband, you are limiting yourself. Think about the future. Think about the circles you want to move in. Firefighters do not get invited to the gala. I slammed the dishwasher shut. I do not care about the gala. Mom, I care about how he treats me. She sighed. The sound of a martyr accepting a burden. Just make sure you keep your finances separate, she whispered, just in case. Then there was Madeline, my best friend, the woman I trusted with every secret I ever held. She took the news better than my parents, or so I thought. We met for drinks at our favorite downtown bar to celebrate the engagement. She cooed over the ring, holding my hand up to the light, though her eyes lingered a second too long on the small size of the stone. He is gorgeous. Z, she said, sipping her martini. And he is obsessed with you. That is the important thing. But as the night went on and the drinks flowed, the edge of her commentary sharpened. You know, she said, leaning in conspiratorially. You are brave. Brave, I asked, marrying a first responder. The statistics are not great, are they? Divorce rates are high, the stress, the trauma, and the danger. God, the danger. She took a sip, watching me over the rim of her glass. You have to be smart. Zoe, love is great, but you need an exit strategy, just in case he gets hurt, or just in case the stress turns him into someone else. Make sure the house is in your name. Make sure the life insurance is solid. I laughed it off at the time. That was just Madeline. She was a consultant. She looked for risk in everything. I told myself she was just being protective. I told myself she was just looking out for me because she loved me. I did not see the calculation in her eyes. I only saw a friend trying to keep me safe. Evan and I ignored them all. We got married in a small ceremony in the park, and 6 months later, we bought the house. It was a craftsman bungalow on the edge of town. Built in 1925, it was a disaster. The porch sagged, the roof leaked, and the shag carpet in the living room smelled like 50 years of wet dog. My parents refused to even step inside, calling it a money pit. Madeline walked through it with a wrinkled nose, asking if we had checked for mold. But Evan and I saw the magic. We spent every weekend that first year renovating. We had no money for contractors, so we did it ourselves. I learned how to sand floors until my arms felt like jelly. Evan learned how to rewire electrical sockets from YouTube videos. We ate pizza on the floor covered in drywall dust, exhausted and filthy and happier than I had ever been in my life. There is a specific memory that I keep playing on a loop in my head now. It was about 6 months before he got sick. We had just finished painting the exterior of the house. It was a soft sage green with white trim. The sun was setting, casting a long golden light across the front yard. We stood on the newly repaired porch. Looking out at the street, Evan wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. He smelled of paint thinner and soap. We did good. Z, he murmured. We did. I agreed. Leaning back into him, he tightened his arms around me. This is it, he said softly. This is where we are going to be. I can see it. You sitting in this rocking chair when you are 80. Me yelling at the neighborhood kids to get off the lawn. We are going to grow old here. Zoe, I promise. I believed him. I believed him because he was Evan. He was the solid ground beneath my feet. He was the man who caught me when I fell. He was the man who promised to show up, standing there in the golden hour, with the smell of drying paint in the air. I felt completely and utterly safe. I thought we had won. I thought we had built a fortress that nothing could touch. I did not know that the enemy was already inside the gates. I did not know that a microscopic cell was already dividing in his body, ticking down the seconds like a bomb. And I certainly did not know that the people I invited to our barbecues, the people who smiled and drank our wine and complimented our house, were already calculating what it would be worth when he was gone. That moment on the porch was the peak. It was the highest point of the roller coaster right before the drop. And looking back, what hurts the most is not the lie. It is the truth of how much we loved it, right before it was stolen. The end of our normal life did not arrive with a scream or an explosion. It arrived in the form of a bottle of ibuprofen sitting on the kitchen counter. For weeks, that bottle had been moving around the house like a restless spirit. I found it on the nightstand. I found it in the bathroom. I found it in Evan's gym bag. When I asked him about it, he shrugged it off with that easy, lopsided smile that usually melted my defenses. He blamed the long shifts. He blamed the hydration levels at the station. He blamed the bright lights of the truck. "I am fine. Z," he would say, swallowing 2 pills dry. "Just a tension headache. You know how it is." I did know how it is. I was a nurse. I knew that stress manifested physically. I knew that sleep deprivation wrecked the body, so I let it go. I accepted the lie because I wanted to believe that my strong, invincible husband was just tired. I chose to be a wife instead of a clinician. That is a regret that will sit in my throat forever. Then came the speech changes. It was subtle at first, a slur on a consonant here, a forgotten word there. He would be telling a story about a call he ran, and he would stop, searching for a word as simple as hose or ladder. He would laugh, tapping his temple. My brain is fried. He would joke, "I need a vacation." But the fear began to coil in my stomach, cold and tight. The crash happened on a Thursday morning. I was upstairs in the intensive care unit, charting on a post-op patient. The unit was quiet, the rhythmic beeping of monitors providing the usual white noise of my workday. My pager buzzed against my hip, but I ignored it, finishing my note. Then my personal cell phone rang. It was against protocol to answer a personal call on the floor. But when I saw the caller ID, my heart stopped. It was the landline for Station 42. I answered, my voice already trembling. "Zoe." It was Captain Miller. His voice was tight, stripped of its usual warmth. "You need to come down to the ER, now. We just brought Evan in." I did not ask questions. I did not log off my computer. I dropped my pen and ran. I ran past the nurses' station, ignoring the startled looks of my colleagues. I ran to the elevators, pounding the button until the doors slid open. The descent from the 5th floor to the ground floor felt like it took 10 years. Every floor the elevator passed was a heartbeat I was missing. When the doors opened on the emergency department level, I sprinted. I knew this hallway. I knew the scuff marks on the linoleum. I knew the smell of bleach and antiseptic. But today, it felt like a foreign planet. I was not Nurse Owens here. I was a terrified wife. I found them in Trauma Bay 2. The room was crowded. Dr. Evans, the attending physician, was barking orders. 2 nurses were establishing IV lines, and in the center of the chaos, lying on the gurney still wearing his turnout pants and a navy t-shirt, was Evan. He was conscious, but he looked gray. His eyes were wide and unfocused, darting around the room as if he could not figure out where he was. "Evan," I shouted, pushing past a resident to get to his side. He looked at me. For a second, there was no recognition, just a blank, terrified stare. Then, slowly, his eyes locked onto mine. "Zoe," he slurred. His speech was thick, like his tongue was too big for his mouth. I fell. I fell. I grabbed his hand. It was freezing cold. "What happened?" I demanded. Looking at Dr. Evans, he had a seizure at the station. "Doctor," Evans said, his voice grim. "Full tonic-clonic, lasted about 2 minutes. He was confused post-ictal, and then he vomited. We are taking him to CT now." I went with them. I stood in the control room while the machine whirred and clicked, slicing through the skull of the man I loved. I watched the images appear on the monitor in black and white grayscale. I did not need a radiologist to tell me what I was seeing. I saw the shift in the midline. I saw the edema, the swelling that was pushing his brain against the bone, and I saw the masses, not one, multiple, bright white spots scattered across the dark matter of his brain like stars in a night sky. The floor seemed to dissolve beneath my feet. I gripped the edge of the console, gasping for air. "It is metastatic," the radiologist whispered. Though he was not talking to me, "It is everywhere." The diagnosis came down like a guillotine later that afternoon. Stage 4 melanoma. It had started somewhere on his skin. Perhaps a mole we never noticed. Perhaps a spot on his back hidden by his uniform. It had traveled silently through his blood, invading his lungs, his liver, and finally, his brain. The prognosis was not a timeline. It was a countdown. When we were finally alone in a private room on the oncology floor, the silence was deafening. Evan was sitting up, the steroids they had given him helping to reduce the swelling and return his speech to normal. He looked at me, his slate-gray eyes clear and devastatingly sad. "Stop looking at the chart." "Zoe," he said softly. I was clutching the paperwork to my chest, as if the medical terminology could somehow offer a loophole. If I just read it enough times, maybe I would find a mistake. It says aggressive. "Evan," I whispered, "it says palliative care recommended." He reached out and took the papers from my hand. He set them on the bedside table. "Face down. Look at me," he commanded. I looked at him. "I am not a patient," he said fiercely. "Not to you. Do not let them turn me into a case number. I am your husband. I am Evan. That does not change because of what is on that scan." I climbed into the narrow hospital bed with him, burying my face in his neck, sobbing until my ribs ached. He held me, stroking my hair, comforting me as if I were the one dying. The news traveled fast. By evening, the visitors began. My parents arrived first. They walked into the room with the stiffness of people entering a tax audit. My mother, Darlene, was wearing a crisp beige trench coat that she did not take off. My father, Richard, stood at the foot of the bed, his hands clasped behind his back. They did not hug him. They did not touch his hand. "So," my father said, clearing his throat, "this is unfortunate. Unfortunate." He used the word you would use for a flat tire or a rained-out barbecue. "How are you holding up?" my mother asked me, ignoring Evan entirely. "You look pale." "Zoe, I am fine." "Mom," I said, my voice brittle. "Evan is the one with brain cancer." "Right," she said, flustered. "Of course." My father pulled up a chair but did not sit. He leaned on the back of it. "We need to talk logistics," he said. "I assume you have looked at the insurance policy. Does the fire department cover this fully, or are there caps on oncology treatments?" I stared at him. "Dad, he was diagnosed 4 hours ago. We are not talking about money right now. We have to talk about money," he countered, his voice rising. "Treatments like this run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you are not careful, this will bankrupt you. And the house is the mortgage insurance active if he cannot work, Richard," Evan said. His voice was calm, but there was a steel edge to it. "I have good insurance. Zoe will be taken care of." My mother pursed her lips. "Well, we just want to make sure. You two have a tendency to be idealistic. Realism is necessary now. You need to gather all your documents, bank accounts, deeds, passwords. You need to be prepared for the worst-case scenario immediately." They stayed for 20 minutes. They asked 6 questions about finances. They asked 0 questions about his pain level, his treatment plan, or his fear. When they left, the air in the room felt cleaner. Madeline arrived an hour later. She burst through the door with a dramatic gasp, rushing to the bedside. She threw her arms around me, hugging me so hard my teeth rattled. "Oh my God! Z," she wailed. "I cannot believe this. This is a nightmare." She turned to Evan, touching his arm with a tentative finger, as if testing to see if he was contagious. "Evan, you poor thing. You look so tired." She pulled up a chair, sitting close. Her eyes were wet with tears, but as she spoke, I noticed her gaze darting around the room. She looked at the IV pump. She looked at the expensive monitors. She looked at my designer purse sitting on the chair. "I am here for whatever you need," she said, squeezing my hand. "Anything. I mean it. Thank you." "Mads," I said, feeling a rush of gratitude. "I really need the support." "Of course," she said. She lowered her voice. "Have you thought about work? You are going to have to take time off, right? That is going to be a huge hit to your income. I am taking FMLA." I said, "I have savings. We will manage?" Madeline nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing slightly. Savings are good, but they burn fast. Zoe, especially with all this, she gestured vaguely at Evan. If you need help managing things, you know I'm good with numbers. You are going to be so overwhelmed emotionally. You should not have to worry about the bills. It sounded kind. It sounded helpful. But there was something in the way she said overwhelmed that felt like she was already writing me off as incompetent. There was a glint in her eye that looked less like sympathy and more like appraisal. She was calculating the burn rate of my life. I ignored the feeling. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that grief makes you suspicious. 2 days later, we went home. The doctors admitted there was nothing curative they could do in the hospital. The goal now was time and comfort. I packed our bags. I signed the discharge papers. I wheeled my husband out of the place where we met, out into the bright, blinding sun of the parking lot, our craftsman bungalow, the house we had renovated with such joy, changed that day. It was no longer a home. It was a facility. I pushed the coffee table in the living room against the wall to make room for a rented hospital bed. I replaced the vase of flowers on the mantelpiece with rows of orange prescription bottles, steroids, anti-seizure medication, painkillers, anti-nausea drugs. I created a chart on a whiteboard and hung it in the kitchen. 8 a.m., dexamethasone, 12 p.m., morphine, 4 p.m., Keppra. My world shrank to the four walls of that living room. I stopped being a wife who laughed and planned date nights. I became a nurse again, but without the protection of a shift change. There was no clocking out. I watched Evan sleep that first night in the hospital bed. The hum of the oxygen concentrator was a rhythmic, mechanical breath filling the silence of the house. I sat in the armchair in the dark, watching the rise and fall of his chest. I felt a profound, aching loneliness. My parents had checked the boxes of financial concern and then retreated to their comfortable, risk-free lives. Madeline had offered to help manage my money, but had not offered to bring a casserole or sit with him so I could shower. I realized then that the isolation was not accidental. Illness makes people uncomfortable. It reminds them of their own mortality. But this felt different. My parents and my best friend were not just uncomfortable, they were distant. They were treating Evan not as a person who was dying, but as a problem that was finally resolving itself. They had never liked him. They had never thought he was good enough. And now, fate was proving them right. He was a liability. He was a tragedy. I looked at my husband, his face pale against the white pillowcase. I vowed then that I would be enough for him. I would be his doctor, his nurse, his wife, and his army. But as I sat there in the dark, clutching the baby monitor I had bought to hear him if he woke up, I realized the battlefield had changed. I was not just fighting the cancer eating his brain. I was fighting the silence of the people who were supposed to love us. And as the numbers on the digital clock ticked from 2 a.m. to 3 a.m., I had the sinking realization that the cancer might be the kinder of the two enemies. At least the cancer was honest about what it wanted to take. You think you know what drowning feels like. You imagine water filling your lungs, the panic of the thrashing, the darkness closing in. But drowning is not always wet. Sometimes, drowning looks like a stack of white envelopes on a kitchen table. It looks like a bank balance turning red. It looks like the slow, suffocating accumulation of numbers that dictate whether your husband gets to die with dignity or in pain. By the 4th week of home hospice, the financial reality of cancer had moved in with us. It sat on the sofa. It slept in the bed. It ate at the table. People tell you that insurance covers everything. That is the great American lie. Insurance covers the big things, the sterile things. It covers the surgery that failed. It covers the radiation that burned. But it does not cover the things that make life livable. It does not cover the specialized protein shakes Evan could actually stomach without vomiting. It does not cover the high-grade incontinence pads, because the insurance-approved ones were as thin as tissue paper. It does not cover the copay on the anti-nausea medication that costs $75 a pill. $75 for one pill. That is the price of 4 hours of relief. I sat at the kitchen table at 2 a.m, surrounded by a fortress of paper. Explanation of benefits. Past due. Final notice. The words blurred together. I was bleeding money. I was hemorrhaging savings that we had spent 5 years building. The renovation fund. Gone. The vacation fund gone. The rainy day fund. We were in the middle of a hurricane, and the umbrella had blown inside out, but amidst this financial hemorrhage, there was a different kind of currency flowing into the house. Every Tuesday and Saturday, a truck from Station 42 would pull up to the curb. They did not use the sirens. They just parked. A massive red beast taking up half the street. Rookie Davis, a kid barely old enough to shave, would jump out and mow the lawn. He never asked. He just did it. Captain Miller would come to the door with a cooler full of meal-prepped dinner's lasagna. Chili, things that could be frozen and reheated. They fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom because they knew the sound was driving Evan crazy. They changed the light bulbs. They were the family we chose. They asked for nothing. They simply saw a gap in the line and stepped up to fill it. It was a stark, painful contrast to the silence from my own bloodline. Then, the vultures began to circle closer. Madeline came over on a Wednesday. She looked immaculate, wearing a silk blouse and holding a latte, creating a jarring visual against my living room, which now smelled of antiseptic and sickness. I was wearing sweatpants I had not washed in 3 days. My hair was a bird's nest. She sat at the table, pushing aside a stack of medical bills with a manicured finger. "Zoe," she said, her voice dropping to that hushed, serious tone she used when giving advice. "You are drowning. I can see it. I am managing." I lied. I rubbed my eyes, which felt like they were full of sand. "No, you are not," she countered. "Look at this mess." She gestured to the papers. "I know Evan's disability checks have not kicked in fully yet, and I know you are on unpaid leave." She reached into her purse and pulled out a checkbook. I swallowed hard. My pride wanted to scream at her to put it away, but my bank account was sitting at $300, and the mortgage was due in 4 days. "I want to help," she said. She wrote quickly, the pen scratching loudly in the quiet house. She tore the check out and slid it across the table. $4,000. It is a loan, she said softly. "Just until the life insurance until things settle. No interest. Just pay me back when you can. We are sisters. Zoe." This is what sisters do. I stared at the check. $4,000 was a lifeline. It was breathing room. It meant I did not have to choose between paying the electric bill and buying the good pain medication. "Thank you," I whispered, feeling a wave of shame wash over me. "I will pay you back. I promise." I deposited the check via my banking app right there in the kitchen, feeling a knot loosen in my chest. The next morning, I woke up after a fitful 3 hours of sleep. I grabbed my phone to check if the deposit had cleared. Needing that visual reassurance, I opened the app. I logged in. My stomach dropped. The balance was exactly where it had been the day before. $312. I frowned, tapping the screen. Had the check bounced? Had I imagined depositing it? I scrolled down to the transaction history. Deposit $4,000. Pending. Transfer to external account, $4,000. Processed. I stared at the screen. My brain, foggy with exhaustion, could not make sense of the numbers. A transfer. I had not transferred anything. I had not paid a bill yet. I clicked on the transaction details. It was a wire transfer to an account I did not recognize. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my veins. I called the bank immediately. The automated system took 10 minutes to navigate. 10 minutes where I paced the kitchen, chewing on my thumbnail. Finally, a human voice. "Ma'am, the transfer was initiated from your device," the representative said, sounding bored. "Using your credentials, biometric login." "But I did not do it," I shouted, realizing too late that my voice might wake Evan. I lowered my voice to a hiss. "I did not move that money." "Do you have a joint account holder?" the rep asked. "Yes, my husband, but he is bedbound. He cannot hold a phone, let alone bank." "Well, perhaps you did it and forgot," the rep suggested, her tone implying that I was hysterical. "It happens. Sleep deprivation. Stress. If the login was biometric, It was you. I hung up, shaking. I sat there, staring at the phone. I had been losing time lately. I would find myself in the laundry room with no memory of walking there. I would find milk in the cupboard and cereal in the fridge. Was I so broken that I was moving money around in my sleep? Or was there another explanation? Madeline knew my passcode. She had seen me type it in 100 times over the years. She had used my phone to order takeout, to play music, but why would she give me money just to take it back? It made no sense, unless the point was not the money, unless the point was to make me feel crazy, to make me doubt my own mind. I did not have time to dwell on it because the doorbell rang. It was Captain Miller again. This time, he was holding a thick manila envelope. "The guys passed the boot around," he said, looking uncomfortable. "We know the insurance is a nightmare. This is cash, off the books, just for groceries, gas, whatever you need. Do not put it in the bank, just use it." He handed me the envelope. It was heavy. "Thank you," I choked out. "Please tell them, just thank you." I took the envelope inside. I counted it at the kitchen table. $2,500 in 20s and 50s. It smelled like old bills and kindness. I put the envelope in the top drawer of the china cabinet. Behind a stack of napkins, I needed to go change Evan's sheets. 10 minutes later, Madeline let herself in. She had a key. I had given it to her years ago for emergencies. "Knock, knock," she called out. "Just checking on my favorite patient." She breezed into the kitchen. I was coming down the hall with an armful of soiled linens. "Hi," I said, breathless. It is a bad morning. He is in a lot of pain." "Oh, poor baby," she cooed. "Do you need coffee? I can make a pot." She stood in the kitchen. The china cabinet was right behind her. I walked the linens to the laundry room. It took me maybe 4 minutes to load the washer and start the cycle. When I came back, Madeline was rinsing a mug in the sink. "I cannot stay," she said, drying her hands. "I have a meeting. Just wanted to see your face. By the way, did that check clear?" I hesitated. I looked at her face. It was open, concerned. "There was a glitch," I said carefully. "I am sorting it out with the bank." She frowned. "Weird. Let me know if you need me to write another one." She left. The house fell silent again. A sick feeling, heavy and dark, settled in my gut. I walked to the china cabinet. I opened the top drawer. The napkins were there. The spare candles were there. The envelope was gone. I pulled the drawer all the way out. I dumped it on the floor. I checked the drawer below it. I checked the floor. I checked the trash can. Nothing. I stood in the center of my kitchen, my hands shaking uncontrollably. $2,500, gone. In the span of 10 minutes, I ran to the front door, throwing it open. Madeline's car was already gone. Did I move it? The voice in my head was louder now, more frantic. Did I put it somewhere else and forget? Am I losing my mind? I tore the living room apart. I checked under the sofa cushions. I checked the freezer. I checked Evan's bedside table. Evan woke up, watching me with hazy, drugged eyes. "Zoe," he rasped. "What are you looking for?" "Nothing," I lied, my voice trembling. I lost my phone. Go back to sleep." I sank to the floor in the hallway, pressing my forehead against the cool wood. I was not losing my phone. I was losing my grip on reality. My phone rang. It was my mother. "Zoe," she said, skipping the greeting. "I have been thinking." "Hello, Mom, with all those strangers in the house," she continued. "The nurses, the hospice people. It is not safe to keep valuables around. People steal. Zoe, especially when they know the owners are distracted." I laughed, a dry, hysterical sound. "You are right, Mom. People do steal. You should gather up the jewelry," she said. "Your grandmother's pearls, the silver service, and Evan's watch, the nice one. Bring them here. We will put them in our safe, for safekeeping, until you know. Until things are settled." She did not say until he dies. She never said the words. "I am not moving anything." "Mom," I said, staring at the empty spot in the china cabinet. "You are being stubborn," she snapped. "We are trying to protect you. When the end comes, there will be chaos. You will not be thinking straight. Let us handle the assets. Assets. That was what our life was to them. A collection of assets to be secured. I hung up on her. I could not breathe. The walls were closing in. That evening, Madeline came back. She said she brought soup. I did not eat it. I watched her. I watched her hands. I watched her eyes. She sat at the table with me while Evan slept. She pulled out a notepad. "We need to get organized." "Z," she said. "I was looking into the paperwork. Does Evan have a durable power of attorney set up? We have a will." I said, "A will is for afterwards," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "I mean for now. If he goes into a coma, if he cannot make decisions. You need legal authority. I am his wife." I said, "I have authority." "It is not that simple," she said, leaning in. "Banks can be tricky. Insurance companies are a nightmare. If his name is on the deed or the accounts, you might get locked out. You need him to sign full power of attorney over to you, immediately, while he can still hold a pen." She looked at me, her eyes intense. "I can help you draft it," she offered. "I have a template. We can get it notarized tomorrow." "Why are you so worried about the deed, Madeline?" I asked. "I am worried about you," she said, looking hurt. "I do not want you to lose the house because of a clerical error." She reached for her purse. "I just want to make sure you are covered. Who is the secondary beneficiary on the life insurance? Is it still his brother?" "No." I said, "It is me." "Right," she said. "But if something happens to you, God forbid, we need to make sure there is a contingency." She stood up to go to the bathroom. I sat there, the phrase, "power of attorney," echoing in my head. I looked at her notepad, which she had left on the table. It was open. I glanced at the page. It was not a list of chores. It was a list of account numbers, my account numbers, and next to them, scribbled in her looping handwriting, were notes: Chase, joint, need signature, life insurance, 500,000, beneficiary update house, estimated value, 450,000. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was not helping. This was an inventory. I heard the toilet flush. Madeline walked back into the room. She did not sit down. She picked up her phone. "I have to take this," she said, looking at the screen. "It is work." She walked onto the sun porch, closing the glass door behind her. She thought the glass was thick enough. She thought I was too tired to listen. I stood up, walking softly to the door. I pressed my ear against the glass. She was not talking to a client. "No, she is falling apart," Madeline said, her voice muffled but clear. "She does not know where the money went. She thinks she lost it. Yeah, she is a wreck." A pause. "I am working on the signature," Madeline said. "She is hesitant, but I will get it. We need that power of attorney before he slips into the coma. If we don't get it, the probate will take months." Another pause. "Don't worry, Darlene, I have got this. We will have control of the accounts by Friday." I stepped back from the door, my blood turning to ice. Darlene, my mother, they were working together. I looked at the empty drawer where the cash had been. I looked at the check that had been clawed back from my account. I looked at the notepad with the inventory of my life. They were not just waiting for him to die. They were trying to strip the carcass before the heart even stopped beating. I retreated to the bedroom, my legs feeling like lead. I sat in the chair next to Evan, listening to the ragged sound of his breathing. Power of attorney. They wanted his hand to sign away our life. They wanted the keys to the kingdom. I looked at my husband's hand, resting on the blanket. It was thin now, the skin translucent, but it was still his hand. I took it in mine. I squeezed it. "I am sorry." "Evan," I whispered into the dark. "I am so sorry." But as I held his hand, a new feeling rose up under the panic. It was cold. It was hard. It was the same feeling I got in the ER when a patient was crashing and there was no doctor in the room. It was the realization that no one was coming to save us. I had to do it myself. The phone was sitting on the kitchen counter, vibrating against the granite. It was not mine. Mine was dead, plugged into the charger in the living room. Drained from hours of doom scrolling through cancer forums and insurance policies, this phone belonged to Madeline. She was in the bathroom, the shower running. She had offered to stay over for a few hours so I could nap, claiming she needed to rinse off the city grime before heading to a client dinner. The device buzzed again. A banner notification lit up the lock screen. I would not have looked. I respect privacy. I am the kind of person who averts their eyes when someone types in a PIN, but I needed the number for the specialty compounding pharmacy that was closing in 20 minutes, and my phone was still rebooting. I reached out to tap the screen, intending only to use the emergency dialer or ask Siri to call the pharmacy, but before my finger touched the glass, a text message preview slid into view. It was from Mom. Did you speak to her about the lawyer meeting yet? We need to lock this down before the weekend. My hand froze in midair. The lawyer meeting. My brain tried to file this away as something innocent. Maybe they were updating their own wills. Maybe they were consulting someone about how to help me with the estate taxes. But the phrasing was wrong. Speak to her. That was me. They were talking about me. And lock this down. That was not the language of assistance. That was the language of a deal. That was the language of a trap snapping shut. The screen went black. I stood there, staring at the dark reflection of my own exhausted face in the glass. The shower stopped running upstairs. I heard the pipes groan. I stepped back from the phone as if it were radioactive. A lawyer. Why would my mother and my best friend be coordinating a meeting with a lawyer without telling me if it was to help me? Why hide it if it was for Evan? Why wasn't I invited? Madeline came down the stairs 5 minutes later, wrapped in a towel, her hair wet and slicked back. She looked fresh, clean, and vibrant, everything I was not. Did my phone ring, she asked, breezing past me to grab it. I think a text came through. I said, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. She glanced at the screen, and for a split second, her expression faltered. A micro flinch. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction, then widened into a practiced smile. Oh, just work, she said, sliding the phone into her purse. Boring compliance stuff. Did you get some rest? I did not sleep. I said, I was calling the pharmacy. Her shoulders relaxed. Good. You need to keep those meds on schedule. She was managing me. I saw it then. Clear as day. The concern, the reminders, the helpfulness. It was all a form of crowd control. She was keeping the grieving widow busy so the real work could happen in the background. I did not confront her. I could not. I had no proof. Only a fragment of a sentence and a gut feeling that was screaming at me to run. Instead, I started watching. The next afternoon, Madeline stepped out onto the back porch to take a call. She slid the glass door shut, but she did not latch it. It had been raining, and the wood of the doorframe was swollen, preventing a tight seal. I was in the kitchen, pretending to organize the chaotic pile of explanation of benefits letters. I stopped rustling the papers. I held my breath. I could hear her voice, muffled but distinct against the rhythm of the rain hitting the gutters. She is stubborn, Madeline was saying. Her tone was impatient, stripped of the sweet, cooing empathy she used with me. She thinks she can handle the mortgage and the medical bills. She is in denial. A pause while the person on the other end spoke. I knew, instinctively, it was my mother. No, she won't sell yet. Madeline said, she is attached to the house. It is emotional for her, but give it 2 weeks. She is running on fumes. She will burn out. When she crashes, we step in. She will burn out. She was not worried I would collapse. She was banking on it. She was predicting it like a weather forecast. I moved away from the door before she turned around. I went into the bathroom and turned on the tap, splashing cold water on my face to hide the fact that I was shaking. That night, I started the log. I found a small, spiral-bound notebook that Evan used to keep in his gym bag to track his lifting stats. I hid it inside the box of tampons under the bathroom sink, the one place I knew neither my father nor Madeline would ever look. I began to write. Tuesday, October 4th. Madeline visited. Checked the mail before bringing it inside. 2 letters from the insurance company are missing. I saw them on the informed delivery email digest, but they never made it to the table. Wednesday, October 5th. Cash envelope in the drawer is light by $200. I know I did not spend it. Thursday, October 6th. My car keys were moved from the hook to the bottom of my purse. Madeline asked if I was feeling confused again. I was building a case. It was the only way I could keep myself from screaming. I had to treat my life like a crime scene and my family like the suspects. The gaslighting was subtle. It was designed to make me feel like I was losing my grip. Objects would migrate. Papers would disappear. Conversations I swore we had were denied. We talked about selling the car. "Zoe," Madeline would say, looking at me with pity, "don't you remember? You said it was too expensive to keep two vehicles." I never said that. I would argue. "You were tired." She would soothe. "You say a lot of things when you are on the Ambien." I stopped taking the Ambien. I flushed it down the toilet. I stayed awake, my eyes gritty and burning, watching the shadows in my own house. On Friday, I called my father. I needed to hear his voice. I needed to know if the man who taught me how to ride a bike, the man who walked me down the aisle, was really part of this. Maybe my mother was driving it. Maybe Madeline was manipulating him too. "Dad." I asked when he answered. "Zoe," he said. He sounded distracted. I could hear the click of a keyboard in the background. "Is everything all right? Is it time?" "No," I said, feeling a fresh wave of nausea. "Evan is stable. I just wanted to talk. I feel very alone." "Dad," the typing did not stop. "We are all having a hard time." "Zoe," he said, "this is not easy for anyone." "I know," I said, "but I feel like I'm drowning in paperwork, and I feel like things are happening that I don't understand." The typing stopped. "What kind of things?" he asked sharply. "Just confusion." I said, "Testing the waters, money things, legal things." There was a pause, a long, heavy silence. "Zoe, listen to me," he said, his voice dropping into a lecture mode. "You are under immense strain. Grief does things to the mind. It makes you paranoid. It makes you irrational. That is why you need to lean on us. Have you sent over the policy numbers I asked for?" I felt a cold stone settle in my stomach. He did not ask about my fear. He did not ask about his dying son-in-law. He pivoted instantly to the data. "I am working on it." I lied. "Good," he said. "And the house deed. You need to locate that. If we need to make moves quickly, we cannot be hunting for paperwork." "Moves?" I asked. "What moves? Protective moves," he said vaguely. "Just find the deed." "Zoe, stop overthinking. Let us handle the heavy lifting." I hung up. "Let us handle the heavy lifting." It sounded so benevolent, but I knew now what they meant. They wanted to lift the burden of ownership right out of my hands. That night, Evan had a moment of clarity. It happened around 3 a.m. The pain medication had worn off, and he woke up with a gasp. I was instantly at his side, adjusting the pillows, reaching for the water cup. He grabbed my wrist. His grip was weak, his fingers trembling, but his eyes were locked onto mine. The fog of the morphine had lifted for a brief, cruel window. "Zoe," he whispered, "I am here." "Baby," I said, "I am here." He looked past me, scanning the dark room. He looked at the door. He looked at the window. "Who is here?" he asked. "Just us," I said. "Just you and me." He shook his head, a small, frustrated movement. "No," he said, "them, the sharks." My heart hammered. He knew, even in his sickness, even through the haze of the cancer eating his temporal lobe, he sensed it. He sensed the predation. "Do you trust me?" he asked. "With my life?" I said, "Then listen." He wheezed. "Even if I say things that hurt, even if I get confused, you have to be the captain. Do not let them take the wheel." I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to spill the poison that was building up inside me. I wanted to tell him about the missing money, the text message, the conversation on the porch. I wanted to scream that his intuition was right, that the sharks were already in the kitchen. But I looked at his face. He was gray. He was dying. He had days, maybe a week left. If I told him, he would spend his final hours in rage. He would spend his last bursts of energy trying to fight a war he could not win. He would die worried about me. I could not do that to him. I had to let him leave this world thinking I was safe. I had to let him think his family, his firefighter brothers. And yes, even my treacherous parents would care for me. I squeezed his hand. "I am the captain, Evan," I promised, forcing a smile. "I have the wheel. No one touches the wheel but me." He closed his eyes, his breathing hitching as the exhaustion pulled him back under. "Good," he murmured. "Good." I sat there until dawn, watching the sun turn the gray sky into a bruised purple. I had lied to him. I did not have the wheel. I was fighting for control of the ship while the crew was trying to throw me overboard. The final piece of the puzzle came 2 days later. On a Sunday, I was searching for a digital receipt for the rented hospital bed. I logged into an old Yahoo email account that I hadn't used regularly since college. It was the email address I used for junk mail, newsletters, and accounts my mother had set up for me years ago. I scrolled through the spam, Bed Bath Beyond coupon, LinkedIn notification, Nigerian prince offering gold, and then a subject line that stopped my heart. Appointment confirmation, consultation with Holloway Associates. I clicked it. My hand was shaking so bad I had to use 2 hands to steady the mouse. "Dear Ms. Caldwell," they used my maiden name. "This email confirms your appointment for next Thursday at 2 p.m. regarding the petition for emergency temporary guardianship. Please bring the medical affidavits discussing the subject's capacity. Attendees, Darlene Caldwell, Richard Caldwell, Madeline Price." The email was forwarded to my old account. Why? Because my mother likely had it set up to auto-forward years ago and forgot. Or maybe she included it on the intake form thinking I would never check it. I read the words again. Petition for emergency temporary guardianship. They were not trying to steal the money. That was too small. That was petty theft. They were trying to steal me. Guardianship. That is what you do for an elderly person with dementia. That is what you do for a child. You declare them incompetent. You declare that they cannot make decisions for themselves due to mental instability or emotional trauma. If they got guardianship, they became me. They could sign checks. They could sell the house. They could access the life insurance. They could decide what happened to Evan's body. And they were building the case right now. The missing money. To prove I was irresponsible. The moved keys. To prove I was confused. Madeline's constant questions about my mental state. She was gathering testimony. They were going to walk into a courtroom while I was burying my husband and tell a judge that the grieving widow was having a psychotic break and needed to be managed for her own good. I closed the laptop. The room spun. I felt bile rise in my throat. I looked at the 3 chairs I had mentally reserved for them at the funeral. I had thought they would be empty because of cowardice. Now I knew the truth. They would be empty because my parents and my best friend would be standing in front of a judge, signing the papers to turn me into a ghost in my own life. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The world looked the same. The sun was shining. The neighbor was walking his dog. But the world had ended. The Zoe who believed in unconditional love, the Zoe who thought family was a safety net, died in that moment. I turned back to the room. I looked at Evan, sleeping his drug-induced sleep. "I have prepared for it," he had said. I finally understood the scale of the war. I was not fighting for assets. I was fighting for my existence. I went to the bathroom. I splashed water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked tired. I looked wrecked. I looked exactly like the unstable, grieving woman they wanted to paint me as. I dried my face. I stood up straight. If they wanted a fight, I would give them a war. But I would not fight it like Zoe the daughter. I would fight it like Zoe the widow. I picked up the phone. I did not call my mother. I did not call Madeline. I dialed the number for the one person Evan had told me to trust. It was time to open the envelope. The transition from fighting for life to waiting for death is not a sudden shift. It is a slow, agonizing change in the atmospheric pressure of the room. The urgency of the doctors and the chaos of the emergency room fade away, replaced by a quiet that is heavy enough to crush you. We had entered the final phase. The hospice nurse, a woman named Nora, who moved with the silent grace of someone who walks between worlds every day, arrived at 8 in the morning. She did not bring defibrillators or adrenaline. She brought lavender lotion and specialized sponges to moisten dry lips. She checked Evan's vitals, her face unreadable. Then she turned to me, her voice soft but devoid of false hope. "Zoe," she said, placing a hand on my forearm. "His breathing has changed. You hear that pattern?" The pause between the breaths. I nodded. I knew it. It was Cheney Stokes' respiration, the body's way of shutting down the engine. "If there is anyone who needs to say goodbye," she said gently, "you need to call them now, not tomorrow, now." I looked at Evan. He was drifting in and out of consciousness, his skin taking on a waxen, translucent quality. He looked peaceful, but it was the peace of a structure that has been hollowed out. I walked into the kitchen to make the calls. I still held a shred of hope, despite everything I had discovered in the last few days, despite the missing money, despite the guardianship email. I thought that death might be the one thing real enough to break through their facade. I thought that if I told them it was the end, the masks would fall, and my parents and best friend would rush to be human beings. I called my mother first. "Mom," I said, my voice steady. "Nora says it is time. You need to come now." There was a pause, and then the sound of silverware clinking against china. "Oh, Zoe," she sighed. "This is terrible timing. We are at the Founders' Day luncheon. Your father is about to give the keynote speech. We cannot just walk out in the middle of the salad course." I gripped the phone. "Mom, he is dying. He might not be here tonight. We will come as soon as the dessert service is over," she promised, her voice brisk. "Just keep him comfortable. We will be there by 6. 6 o'clock. 7 hours away." I hung up and called Madeline. "Mads," I said, "it is happening. Zoe, I am so sorry," she whispered. "I am stuck in a client pitch in the city. I cannot get out. I tried to reschedule. But this account is huge. I will be there first thing tomorrow morning. I promise. Tomorrow." I put the phone down on the counter. The kitchen was silent. They were not coming. It was not because of a luncheon. It was not because of a client pitch. I knew what it was. They did not want to be in the room when the death happened. They did not want to witness the messy, ugly reality of the end. They wanted to arrive when the body was clean, when the tears were cinematic, when they could perform their grief for an audience without having to endure the trauma of the actual event. They were waiting for the curtain call so they could take a bow, but they refused to be part of the play. I walked back into the living room. Nora had dimmed the lights and turned on a small fan to circulate the air. She looked at me, saw the emptiness in my eyes, and she knew. She did not ask where they were. She simply pulled a chair close to the bed for me and then stepped into the shadows of the hallway to give us privacy. I sat down. I took Evan's hand. It was cool to the touch. "I am here," I whispered. "I am right here." I sat there for 2 hours, watching the rise and fall of his chest, counting the seconds between each breath, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, then, suddenly, he moved. His eyes opened. They were not the hazy, drug-clouded eyes of the last few days. They were clear. It was that phenomenon the nurses talked about: terminal lucidity, the final rally, the surge of energy before the light goes out forever. "Zoe," he croaked. I leaned in, bringing a cup of water to his lips with a sponge. "I am here, baby. The lockbox," he said. His voice was weak, barely a whisper, but the intent behind it was iron. "Get the lockbox." From the top of the closet, I hesitated. "Evan, you need to rest." "Now, Zoe," he insisted. "Please." I ran to the bedroom. I dragged a chair over to the closet and reached up to the top shelf, behind the winter blankets. I pulled down the heavy, fireproof metal box we kept for our passports and birth certificates. I brought it back to the living room and set it on the bed next to his legs. "Open it," he said. "The code is my badge number." I spun the dials. 4, 2, 9, 1. The latch clicked. I lifted the lid. Inside, it was not just passports, it was an organizational masterpiece. There were file folders, color-coded and labeled in Evan's neat, block-letter handwriting, life insurance, bank accounts, house deed, passwords, everything was in order. But as I looked closer, I realized these were not the original documents I had seen years ago. These were new. The dates on the printouts were recent from 3 weeks ago. Right before he lost the ability to walk, he had been working. While I was sleeping, while I was at the pharmacy, while I was crying in the shower, he had been lying in this bed, using his phone and his iPad to build this fortress of paper. I looked at him, tears streaming down my face. "Evan, you did all this," he nodded, his breath hitching. "I had to adjust some things." He whispered, "I changed the access codes. I moved the primary accounts. I set up two-factor authentication to go to a burner phone. It is in the box." He pointed a trembling finger at a cheap, prepaid flip phone tucked in the corner of the box. Why, I asked. "Why did you do all this?" He looked at me, and the sadness in his eyes was so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing on my chest. "Not because I don't trust you." "Zoe," he said, "never think that. I trust you with my soul." He took a shallow breath, wincing. "I did it because I don't trust them." He did not have to say their names. We both knew who them was. I looked down at the box. He had known. He had seen what I was too afraid to admit. He had seen the way they looked at our house, the way they asked about the insurance, and instead of spending his final days angry, he had spent them protecting me. He reached into the box and pulled out a thick, white envelope. It was sealed with heavy tape. There was no writing on the outside. He held it out to me. His hand was shaking violently now. "Take this," he said. I took it. It felt heavy, like it contained more than just paper. "Listen to me. Zoe," he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly murmur. "Do not open this today. Do not open this when the coroner comes." When I asked, clutching the envelope to my chest, "Open it when I am gone," he said. "Open it when you are alone, truly alone, and do not let anyone else see what is inside. Not your mother, not Madeline, no one." He gripped my hand, his fingernails digging into my skin. "Promise me," he demanded. "I promise." I sobbed. He relaxed slightly, sinking back into the pillows. "They think you are weak, Zoe," he whispered. "They think your grief makes you blind. They are going to try to use your pain against you." He looked at the ceiling, blinking slowly. "Don't let them turn your grief into a key," he said. "Do not let them open you up and take what is yours." I buried my face in his neck, smelling the scent of his skin, faintly metallic, faintly sweet. Underneath the illness, I wept for the time we had lost. I wept for the unfairness of it all, and I wept because, in his final moments, he had to worry about lawyers and bank accounts instead of just feeling love. He stroked my hair, his hand heavy and slow. "You are stronger than they think," he murmured. "You are the girl who saved the coffee. You are the girl who fixes broken things." We stayed like that for a long time. The afternoon sun began to fade, casting long shadows across the room. Nora came in once to check the pump, gave me a sad smile, and left again. The house was so quiet, I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Evan's breathing was getting shallower. The pauses were getting longer. 20 seconds, 30 seconds. He turned his head on the pillow to look at me one last time. His eyes were starting to glaze over, the light fading behind the slate gray. "Zoe," he whispered. "Yes, Evan, be careful," he said. "I know." I said, "I will be." "No," he said, forcing the words out with the last of his strength. "I mean, I checked the logs." He swallowed hard. "They tried to log in. Zoe, to the retirement fund, to the savings." I froze. When I asked, "Last week," he whispered, "and the week before." Multiple times. Incorrect password attempts. They were trying to guess it. He closed his eyes. They were trying to rob us while I was still in the room. The sentence hung in the air, more chilling than the cold skin of his hand. They had not just been planning. They had been actively trying to breach the walls while he was lying 5 feet away. They had tried to rob a dying man. Evan let out a long, shuddering breath. His hand went limp in mine. He did not die in that exact second. He lingered for another hour, drifting into the deep, final sleep. But that was the last thing he ever said to me. His final words were not a declaration of love, though his actions were the greatest act of love I had ever known. His final words were a warning, a confirmation. I sat there, holding the sealed envelope in one hand and his cooling hand in the other. The grief was there, massive and tidal, waiting to crash down on me. But underneath the grief, something else was hardening, something cold and sharp, like the edge of a diamond. He had given me a shield. He had given me a weapon. And when my parents and Madeline finally showed up, expecting a broken, weeping widow who would sign whatever they put in front of her, they were going to find something very different. They were going to find the wife of Evan Owens, and she was prepared. There is a specific weight to a firefighter's funeral. It is heavier than a civilian service. It is dense with tradition, steeped in a century of rituals designed to turn individual grief into collective honor. The air in the chapel did not just smell of lilies and floor wax. It smelled of polished leather, pressed wool, and the metallic tang of brass buttons. The casket stood at the front, draped in the American flag. On top of it sat Evan's helmet, the yellow composite scorched black near the brim from the warehouse fire 3 years ago. Next to the helmet were his gloves, fingers curled as if still gripping a Halligan bar, and on the floor, in front of the altar, sat his boots, empty, standing at attention for legs that would never step into them again. I sat in the center of the first row. My spine was rigid, not because of posture, but because if I relaxed even a fraction of an inch, I felt I would shatter into 1,000 pieces. To my right sat Captain Miller and the men from Station 42. They were a wall of navy blue. They breathed in unison. They moved in unison. They were the brothers Evan had chosen, and they were fulfilling their final duty to him with a terrifying precision. To my left, there were 3 chairs. I had placed small white cards on them. Mother, Father, Madeline. I stared at those cards. The calligraphy was elegant. The velvet of the seats was plush, and the space above them was empty. It was 10 minutes past the hour. The organist was looping the same mournful prelude he had been playing for 20 minutes. The guests behind me were shifting in the pews, the rustle of fabric and the clearing of throats growing louder. They were waiting for the family. They were waiting for the people who shared Evan's last name, or my last name, to walk down the aisle and complete the picture. I checked my watch. I checked the door. My brain knew what was happening. I had the logbook. I had the missing cash. I had the email about the guardianship. I knew these people were plotting against me. And yet, the human heart is a stupid, stubborn organ. Part of me, the part that was still a daughter, still a best friend, hoped that the gravity of death would override their greed. I hoped that seeing the casket would shame them into decency. Then, the vibration in my hand, the text message from Madeline. Emergency. Can't make it. I looked at the phone. I looked at the empty chairs. The hope died instantly, replaced by a cold, clarifying anger. It was not an anger that burned. It was an anger that froze. It turned my blood into ice water. I nodded to the funeral director. A silent signal. Start? He looked confused. He glanced at the empty seats, then back at me, his eyebrows raised in a silent question. Are you sure? I nodded again. Close the doors. The heavy oak doors boomed shut, sealing us inside. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The service was a blur of liturgy and eulogies delivered by men who had walked into burning buildings with my husband. Captain Miller spoke about Evan's calm under pressure. He told the story of how Evan had delivered a baby in the back of the rig on the interstate during a snowstorm. He spoke of Evan's laugh, that deep, rumbling sound that could diffuse the tension of a 12-hour shift. I listened, but I did not cry. I felt like I was watching the scene from behind a thick pane of glass. Then, it was my turn. I stood up, My legs felt heavy, like I was walking through deep water. I approached the podium. I gripped the sides of the wood, my knuckles white. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw my colleagues from the ICU in the third row. Nurses, doctors, respiratory therapists. They were wearing black, but I could see the fatigue in their eyes, the shadow of the shifts they had just worked or were about to work. They did not look at me with pity. They looked at me with solidarity. They knew what it was to lose a patient. They knew what it was to lose a husband. They showed up because witnessing pain is part of the job description, and they never clock out of caring. Then I looked at the 3 empty chairs in the front row. They were gaping holes in the visual landscape of the room. They were loud in their silence. I took a breath. I did not unfold the speech I had written on a piece of notebook paper. That speech was for a world where families loved each other. That speech was for a world where my parents were sitting there holding my hand. Evan never liked long speeches. I said, my voice was low, but the microphone carried it to the back of the room. He was a man of action. If the alarm rang, he went. He did not ask if it was convenient. He did not ask if the weather was nice. He put his boots on and he went. I paused, looking directly at the empty seats. We talk a lot about love, I continued. We write about it in cards. We say it on the phone. But in the end, love is not a noun. It is a verb. Love is not a feeling you hold in your chest. Love is the physical act of showing up when it is hard. Love is standing in the room when the air is sucked out. I looked up, meeting the eyes of the congregation. If you are not here, you do not love. It is that simple. Thank you all for being here. I stepped down. The silence in the room was absolute. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of shock. I had not screamed, but I had drawn a line in the sand with a knife. Then came the bell ceremony. A uniformed firefighter walked to the front of the church. He stood before a silver ceremonial bell. He rang it. Ding, ding, ding. 3 rings. A pause. Ding, ding, ding. 3 rings. A pause. Ding, ding, ding. 3 rings. The signal for the end of duty. The signal that the fire is out and the unit is returning to quarters. Then, the static crackle of a radio dispatch filled the church. It was a recording, played over the PA system. Dispatch to Kestrel Point Fire Command. Command. Go ahead. Dispatch calling Lieutenant Evan Owens. Silence. Dispatch calling Lieutenant Evan Owens. Silence. Dispatch calling Lieutenant Evan Owens. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. Agonizing and total. I bit my lips so hard I tasted copper. Lieutenant Evan Owens has answered his final call. He has completed his tour of duty. His assignment is finished. He is going home. Station 42 is clear. That was the moment the dam broke for the room. I heard the sobbing start behind me. I heard the tough, hardened firefighters sniffing back tears. But I stood still. I stared at the flag. I was not crying for Evan anymore. I had done my crying in the dark while he held my hand. I was crying for the Zoe who was sitting in that front row alone. I was crying for the betrayal that was unfolding in real time. The service ended. The pallbearers, 6 of Evan's crew, lifted the casket. They carried him out into the bright, blinding sunlight of the afternoon. I followed. Outside, the air was crisp. The hearse was waiting. People began to filter out, forming a line to offer their condolences. I shook hands. I nodded. I heard the same phrases over and over. He was a good man. I'm so sorry. Let us know if you need anything. I thanked them mechanically. My eyes kept scanning the parking lot, looking for a Lexus, looking for Madeline's sedan. Maybe they had come late. Maybe they were hiding in the back. But there was nothing. The crowd began to thin. The hearse engine started. A low hum. Mrs. Owens. The voice came from my left. It was rough, gravelly. I turned. A man was standing near the wheel of the hearse. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a scruffy beard that looked like it hadn't seen a razor in 3 days. He was wearing a black suit that was slightly too tight across the chest, and his tie was crooked. He looked like a rough draft of Evan. The same jawline, the same slate-gray eyes. But where Evan's eyes were kind, this man's eyes were guarded, cynical. Miles. I said. I had not seen Miles Hart in 4 years. He was Evan's half-brother from his father's first marriage. They had a complicated relationship, not enemies, but strangers who shared blood. Miles lived 2 states away. He worked on oil rigs. He was the black sheep. I did not think you would come. I said. He shrugged, jamming his hands into his pockets. He was a good guy. He said, better than me. He deserved a full house. He looked at the empty family car. He looked at me standing alone. Where are they? He asked bluntly. The parents? The best friend? The ones who looked down their noses at me at the wedding. They had car trouble, I said, repeating the lie. And an emergency. Miles laughed. It was a dry, barking sound. Bullshit. I looked at him, surprised by his candor. Yeah, well, I said, it is what it is. He took a step closer. He lowered his voice, looking around to make sure the funeral director wasn't listening. Look, Zoe, he said, I am not here to cause drama. I paid my respects. I am heading out, but I need to tell you something. What I asked. He pulled a pack of cigarettes out of his pocket, tapped one out, but didn't light it. He just rolled it between his fingers. Your friend, he said, the blonde. Madeline. My stomach tightened. What about her? She texted me. He said, you, I asked, confused. Why would she text you? She hasn't seen you since the wedding. I don't even think she has your number. She found me on social media, Miles said. Sent me a direct message on Tuesday, 2 days ago. I stared at him. Tuesday, the day Evan died. The day she was supposedly crying in my kitchen. What did she say? I asked. She said she was helping you get the estate in order. Miles said, she said you were too distraught to handle the paperwork. She wanted to know if Evan had ever updated his beneficiary information on the old policy his dad took out. She wanted to know if my name was still on anything. I felt the blood drain from my face. She asked you about the insurance, I whispered. Yeah, Miles said. She was fishing. Zoe. She wasn't asking how I was doing. She wasn't telling me my brother was dead. She was asking who gets the payout. He looked at me, his eyes hard. I told her I didn't know anything. He said, but here's the thing. If she is helping you, why didn't she just ask you, why go behind your back to the estranged brother 2 states away? I could not answer. My throat was closed tight. She was hunting. While Evan was taking his last breaths, while I was holding his hand, Madeline was not grieving. She was auditing. She was terrified that there might be an old policy with a brother's name on it. A policy she couldn't touch. She was doing due diligence on her heist, and she did it 2 days ago. Miles put the unlit cigarette back in the pack. I don't know what is going on with your family, Zoe, he said, but people don't ask those kinds of questions unless they are looking for a payday. Watch your back. He nodded once, a quick, jerky motion. Take care of yourself, kid. He turned and walked away, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel, heading toward a beat-up pickup truck parked at the edge of the lot. I stood there, the funeral director waiting patiently by the car door. I looked at the chapel one last time. The doors were open now. I could see the front row. The 3 chairs were still there. The velvet ropes were still up. The cards with their names were still visible. I finally understood. They did not miss the funeral because they were too sad. They did not miss the funeral because they were busy. They missed the funeral because they were afraid. They were afraid to look me in the eye. Not because of guilt, I gave them too much credit for that. They were afraid because they were currently in the process of trying to strip me of everything I owned. And it is hard to hug a victim while you are holding the knife. It was a tactic, isolation, destabilization. Keep me lonely. Keep me unsupported. Make me feel like the world has abandoned me so that when they finally showed up with their solutions and their guardianship papers, I would be so desperate for connection that I would sign anything just to be held. They wanted me to feel small. They wanted me to feel like a widow who needed saving. I looked at the hearse where Evan lay. I touched the pocket of my black dress, feeling the outline of the sealed envelope he had given me. They made a mistake. They thought the empty chairs would break me. They thought the silence would crush me, but they forgot who I was. I was an ICU nurse. I lived in the silence between heartbeats. I lived in the space where things went wrong. I got into the car. I closed the door. Drive. I said to the driver, as the car pulled away. I did not look back at the empty chairs. I looked forward. The funeral was over. The mourning period was finished. The investigation was closed. I had all the evidence I needed. Now, the trial would begin, and I would be the judge, the jury, and the executioner. The funeral was over. The guests were gone. The last casserole dish had been put in the refrigerator, and the house was finally, terrifyingly silent. I sat at the dining room table. The only light came from the small lamp in the corner and the streetlights filtering through the blinds. In front of me lay the heavy white envelope Evan had pulled from the lockbox with his dying hands. My fingers trembled as I reached for the letter opener. This was not just paper. This was the last time I would ever hear his voice. This was the conversation he had been too weak to finish. I sliced the heavy tape. The sound was loud in the empty room, like a zipper being pulled down on a body bag. I slid the contents out. It was a stack of papers about an inch thick. On top was a handwritten letter on lined yellow legal pad paper, the kind he used to take notes during training drills. Zoe, it began. I had to stop. Just seeing his handwriting, that blocky, all-caps script that I had seen on grocery lists and birthday cards for 5 years, made my chest constrict so tightly I could barely breathe. If you are reading this, I am gone. And if you are reading this, it means you are alone. Good. I am sorry I have to do this to you. I am sorry that instead of leaving you with just memories of our life, I am leaving you with a dossier. But I know who you are. You look for the best in people. You think because you are honest. Everyone else is too. You think family implies loyalty. I need you to stop thinking like that. Right now, tonight, I did not lose my mind at the end. Zoe, I know the meds made me groggy, and I know I slept a lot, but I saw things. I saw things when you were in the shower. I saw things when you were sleeping in the chair next to me. 3 weeks ago, when Madeline came over to watch me, so you could go to the pharmacy. She didn't sit with me. She went straight to the china cabinet. I watched her. Zoe. I feigned sleep. I watched her open the top drawer and take out the envelope the boys from the station brought. She counted it. She put half of it back, and she put the other half in her purse. I gasped. A sharp, involuntary sound. The missing cash. I had thought I was losing my mind. I had torn the house apart looking for it, doubting my own memory, thinking grief had made me careless. But I wasn't careless. I was being robbed. I wanted to yell. The letter continued. I wanted to call her out, but I knew you wouldn't believe it, not without proof. You would think I was hallucinating from the brain swelling. You would think I was paranoid, and she would have talked her way out of it. She is good at that. She would have said she was moving it for safekeeping. So I stayed quiet. And I started watching. I saw your mother, Darlene. I heard them talking on the back porch when they thought the door was closed. I heard your mother say, "We need to make sure the deed is accessible. If he dies intestate, it is going to be a mess." Intestate. That means without a will. She wasn't worried about you. She was worried about the probate court. I realized then that I could not protect you physically anymore. I couldn't throw a punch. I couldn't kick them out of the house. So I did the only thing I could do. I called in a favor. I called Harper Sloan. You don't know him, but he is a forensic accountant who volunteers with the Firefighters Union Legal Aid. I told him everything. We set up a trap. Zoe, and they walked right into it. Look at the papers. I set the letter down. My hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled against the wood. I turned to the next document in the stack. It was a printout of a security log. It looked like computer code at first, but someone Harper, I assumed, had highlighted the relevant lines in neon yellow. Bank of America, savings account, ending in 4492. Access attempt failed. Date October 12th. Time 3:14 p.m. IP, address, verified location, residence of Madeline Price. I stared at the date. October 12th. That was a Tuesday. I was at work. Madeline had texted me that day saying she was swamped with meetings and couldn't stop by. She wasn't at a meeting. She was sitting at her computer, trying to hack into my savings account. There were more. Vanguard Retirement Fund. Password, reset request. Initiated via email. Recovery email, used mprice. consulting@gmail.com. She had tried to reset the password. She had tried to lock me out of my own retirement fund before Evan was even cold. The audacity of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just greed. It was entitlement. She felt she had a right to that money. She felt that because she was the smart friend, the financial friend, she should be the one holding the purse strings. I flipped the page. This was a transcript. It looked like a screenshot of a text message thread. From Darlene Caldwell to Madeline Price. Darlene, did you find the policy number for the life insurance yet? Madeline, no. He has it locked down. I tried the usual passwords. Birthday, anniversary, nothing works. Darlene, keep trying. We need to know the amount. If it is under $200,000, it is barely worth the legal fees to fight for control. Madeline, it is more. Firefighters have a union policy plus the city policy. It is at least $500,000, maybe more with the double indemnity for hazardous duty. Darlene, okay, good. Keep pushing the Zoe is exhausted narrative. We need witnesses to say she is not coping well. I felt physically ill. My stomach churned, a violent reaction to the calculated cruelty on the page. It is barely worth the legal fees. My mother, the woman who gave birth to me. She was calculating the return on investment of my husband's death. She was weighing the effort of destroying me against the potential payout. I pushed the papers away. Standing up and pacing the room, I needed air. The house felt contaminated. They had been in this room. They had sat in these chairs, but there was more in the envelope. I sat back down. I had to see it all. I had to drink the entire cup of poison. The next document was a legal draft. It was stamped draft, not for filing. The header read, Petition for Emergency Temporary Guardianship. I read the legal jargon, my eyes widening in horror. Petitioner Richard and Darlene Caldwell. Subject, Zoe Owens. Allegation, the subject is demonstrating acute psychological instability following the terminal diagnosis of her spouse. Subject has a history of emotional volatility cited by witness Madeline Price. Subject has been observed mismanaging funds cited cash lost in home. Subject is currently unfit to make financial or medical decisions. Request immediate temporary control of all assets, real estate, and beneficiary designations to be granted to the petitioners for the protection of the estate. I stopped reading. They weren't just going to steal the money. They were going to erase me. They were building a narrative that I was crazy. The missing cash. They stole it to prove I was irresponsible. The confusion. They manufactured it to prove I was unstable. And the funeral. Suddenly, the empty chairs made perfect sense. If they had come to the funeral, they would have had to act like grieving, supportive family members. They would have had to hug me. They would have had to stand by my side. But if they stayed away, they could tell the judge, "We tried to go, Your Honor." But she was so erratic, so hostile. She told us not to come. She isolated herself. It is proof of her mental breakdown. Their absence wasn't a snub. It was evidence. They didn't miss the funeral because they were sad. They missed it because they didn't want to stand next to the pain. They wanted to stand next to the money. And to get the money, they had to prove that the person holding it, me, was broken beyond repair. I looked at the last document in the stack. It was different. It was on thick, bonded paper. It bore the seal of a notary public. Irrevocable trust agreement. It was signed by Evan Owens. The date was 3 days before he died. I read the summary. I, Evan Owens, being of sound mind, hereby transfer all assets, including life insurance policy number 49902, into the Owens Family Trust. Sole trustee, Zoe Owens. Successor trustee, Harper Sloan. Esquire, Clause 4, B. No funds from this trust may be accessed. managed, or dispersed by any party related to the Caldwell family, nor by Madeline Price. Any attempt by these parties to petition for access shall trigger an automatic freeze of assets and an immediate audit of the petitioner. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. He had done it. He hadn't just watched them. He had checkmated them. He had moved everything. The house, the insurance, the savings. It was all in a trust. It wasn't in his name anymore, and it wasn't in mine. It was in a fortress that he had built with Harper Sloan. If they tried to get guardianship of me, it wouldn't matter. The trust was a separate entity. They could declare me the Queen of England or a raving lunatic, and they still couldn't touch a dime of the money, and by specifically naming them in the no access clause. He had left a permanent legal record of his distrust. If they ever went to court, this document would be Exhibit A. It was a dead man testifying against them. I picked up Evan's letter again. There was a postscript at the bottom. P.S. I know this hurts. I know you want to ask them why. Don't. You will never get an answer that satisfies you because they don't speak your language. They speak currency. You speak loyalty. So don't ask. Just close the door. I love you. Zoe. I will always be the guy who fixed your coffee. Love, Evan. I put the letter down. I sat there for a long time. The tears I expected did not come. The hysteria they were counting on did not arrive. Instead, a strange, cool clarity washed over me. It felt like the moment in the ER when a patient crashes, and the panic vanishes, replaced by pure, mechanical focus. I gathered the papers. I put them back in the envelope. I walked to the kitchen and found a roll of duct tape. I taped the envelope shut, layer after layer, until it was a silver brick. I walked out onto the front porch. It was 3 a.m. The neighborhood was asleep. The air was cold, biting at my bare arms, but I didn't feel it. I sat on the swing where Evan and I used to sit and dream about growing old. I looked at the driveway where my parents' Lexus should have been. I looked at the spot where Madeline used to park. They were coming. I knew that now. They would give me a day or two to grieve, and then they would descend. They would come with casseroles and concern, and behind their backs, they would be holding the guardianship papers. They expected to find a widow. They expected to find a victim. They expected to find a woman so shattered by loss that she would hand over the keys to her life just to make the hurting stop. I looked at the silver envelope in my lap. They were walking into a slaughter. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a witness with a signed confession. I leaned back, the chains of the porch swing creaking softly in the night. For the first time in months, I didn't feel afraid. I didn't feel confused. I felt ready. I watched the streetlights flicker, waiting for the sun to come up, waiting for the enemy to arrive. Let them come. I had the high ground now. And thanks to Evan, I had the ammunition. It took exactly 7 days for the sharks to circle back. I knew they were coming. The silence following the funeral had been tactical, a calculated gap designed to let the loneliness fester. They wanted me to sit in this empty house for a week, listening to the floorboards creak, stewing in the vacuum where Evan used to be. They wanted me desperate. They wanted me weak. They wanted me to be the kind of person who would open the door and fall into their arms, grateful for any scrap of human contact. Even if that contact came with a price tag, I was ready. I had spent the week not in mourning, but in preparation. I had cleaned the house, scrubbing away the smell of antiseptic and sickness until the air smelled like lemon and wood polish. I had showered, dressed in a sharp pair of black trousers and a white silk blouse, not the yoga pants of a depressed widow, but the armor of a woman about to enter a boardroom. When the doorbell rang at 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, I did not jump. I was sitting in the living room, drinking tea, watching the door with the cold patience of a sniper. I opened it. They were standing there in a tableau that looked like it had been staged by a greeting card company. My mother, Darlene, was in the center, holding a foil-covered casserole dish that smelled of lasagna. My father, Richard, stood to her right, holding a bottle of expensive red wine, and Madeline was on the left, clutching a heavy gift bag from a high-end spa boutique. They looked perfect. They looked concerned. They looked like a loving family arriving to support their grieving daughter. If I hadn't read the emails, I might have believed it. "Zoe," my mother cried out, her face crumpling into a mask of practiced tragedy. "Oh, my poor baby." She surged forward, bypassing my personal space to crush me in a hug. The casserole dish dug into my spine. She smelled of Chanel No. 5 and hairspray. The scent of my childhood. The scent of appearances being maintained at all costs. I stood stiffly in her arms, letting her perform the embrace. "We have been so worried about you," she murmured into my ear. "We didn't want to intrude too soon. We wanted to give you space, but we just couldn't stay away any longer." She pulled back, looking at me with wet, shimmering eyes. It was a masterclass in acting. I stepped back, allowing them into the foyer. "Hello, Mom? Hello, Dad? Madeline?" My father walked in. But he didn't look at me. His eyes went immediately to the ceiling, scanning for water stains. Then he looked at the floor, checking the condition of the hardwood. He wasn't greeting his daughter. He was inspecting an asset. "The place looks clean," he said, sounding surprised. "We expected things to be a bit more chaotic." "I have had a lot of time on my hands," I said, my voice neutral. Madeline stepped forward, thrusting the gift bag at me. "This is for you." "Z," she said, her voice soft and syrupy. "Bath salts, calming candles, a silk eye mask. You need to pamper yourself. You look," she trailed off, her eyes scanning my face, looking for the dark circles, the red eyes, the signs of the breakdown she had promised my parents was imminent. "You look tired," she finished, deciding to stick to the script even if the visual evidence didn't support it. "Come in," I said. "Sit down." We moved into the living room. I had set the stage carefully. The coffee table was clear of clutter. No tissues, no medical bills, just 4 coasters and a vase of fresh tulips. They sat on the sofa, my parents side by side, Madeline in the armchair. I took the seat opposite them, putting the coffee table between us. It felt less like a family gathering and more like a deposition. "So," my mother began, smoothing her skirt, "how are you managing? Really? You know you can be honest with us. You don't have to be brave. I am managing," I said, "one day at a time." My father cleared his throat. He set the wine bottle down on the coaster with a heavy thud. "Zoe, we need to have a serious conversation," he said. "We know you are grieving. We know you are not thinking clearly right now. That is natural. But we are here to help you make the hard decisions." "Hard decisions," I asked, "about your living situation." My mother interjected, leaning forward. "Honey, look around. This house, it is too much. It is too big for one person. And the memories. Every corner of this place screams Evan. It is unhealthy. You are going to drown in the sadness if you stay here." She reached out and patted my knee. "We have discussed it," she continued. "We think you should move back home with us, just for a while. 6 months, maybe a year. Until you are back on your feet, we can clear out the guest suite." My father added, "You will have privacy, but you won't be alone, and we can get this place on the market while the inventory is low." I checked the comps in the neighborhood. It is a seller's market. "Zoe, if we list it next week, we could get top dollar." I looked at them. They had been in the house for less than 5 minutes, and they were already trying to evict me. "Sell the house?" I asked, keeping my face blank. "Evan and I spent 3 years renovating this place. He put the roof on with his own hands." "That is exactly the point," Madeline said. She leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Z, do you really want to live in a mausoleum every time you see that roof? You are going to think of him. It is going to keep the wound open. We want you to heal. And the equity," my father said, unable to help himself. "You have a significant amount of equity tied up here. It is dead money. If we liquidate it, we can put it into a high-yield portfolio. It could generate income for you. You wouldn't have to work for a year." Madeline nodded enthusiastically. She reached into her oversized purse and pulled out a glossy folder. "I actually ran some numbers," she said, sliding the folder across the table toward me. "Just preliminary stuff. But with the life insurance payout, which I assume is coming soon, and the house sale, you are looking at a substantial principal. She tapped the folder with a manicured fingernail. I can manage it for you. Z, she said. I can set up a diversified trust. Low risk, steady growth. You shouldn't have to worry about the stock market while you are mourning. Let me take that burden off your shoulders. I looked at the folder. Price Wealth Management. It was impressive. They had a plan. They had a timeline. They had probably already drafted the listing agreement for the realtor. I looked up at them. They were waiting for me to nod. They were waiting for the gratitude. There is just one thing I'm confused about. I said softly, What is that? Honey, my mother asked. I looked at the three of them, making eye contact with each one in turn. I was confused about why there were 3 empty chairs in the front row of the funeral. I said. The air in the room vanished. The silence that followed was not the respectful silence of mourning. It was the sharp, panicked silence of a script going off the rails. My mother blinked rapidly. Madeline shifted in her seat. My father frowned, his brow furrowing. Zoe, my mother said, her voice dropping to a whisper. We told you. The car. The transmission, I said. Right. The Lexus with 30,000 miles on it blew a transmission on the highway. It was a freak mechanical failure. My father snapped. Defensive. It happens. We were stranded on the side of the interstate for 4 hours waiting for a tow. And you? Madeline, I asked, turning to her. The emergency. She looked down at her hands. It was a client crisis. Z. A legal issue. If I hadn't been there, the firm would have lost the account. I felt terrible. I was crying in the conference room. I wanted to be with you so bad. I nodded slowly. I let the silence stretch again. I let them sit in their lies. It is just strange, I said, leaning back in my chair. Because Captain Miller said the service was beautiful. He said the bell ceremony was heartbreaking. And I stood there, looking at those empty seats, and I wondered if you were so worried about me. Why didn't you call? We didn't want to upset you, my mother said quickly. You were so emotional that day. We thought hearing about our car trouble would just add to your stress. So you ghosted me instead, I asked, at my husband's funeral. Zoe, you are being incredibly sensitive, Madeline said, her voice taking on a slight edge. We are here now, aren't we? We are here with food and support. Why are you focusing on the one negative thing when we are trying to help you build a future? Because the past informs the future. Madeline. I said. My father sighed. A loud, impatient sound. This is exactly what we were afraid of, he said. Looking at my mother. She is fixating. She is paranoid. Zoe, listen to yourself. You are attacking the people who love you because you are angry at the universe for taking Evan. It is displacement. Displacement. I repeated. Is that what it is? Yes. My mother said, You are not yourself. You are exhausted. You are likely suffering from traumatic grief. That is why you cannot make these decisions about the house or the money alone. You are not rational right now. Madeline jumped in, seizing the opening. Speaking of rational. Z, she said, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. I was going to bring this up later. But did you ever find that cash? The envelope from the firefighters. I looked at her. She didn't blink. No, I said, I never found it. See, she said, turning to my parents. She lost $2,000 and doesn't know where it went. She is having memory lapses. She turned back to me, her face full of fake sympathy. It is okay. Z, it is the stress. But that is why I am worried about the insurance check. If you deposit $500,000 into your account right now, and you are in this state, mistakes happen, people get scammed. You could lose it all. We just want to protect you, my mother said. We want to set up a safety net, a guardianship. I said. The word hung in the air. My mother froze. My father's eyes narrowed. We didn't say guardianship, my father said slowly. We said a safety net, maybe a power of attorney, just temporary, just until you are well again. I stood up. The movement was sudden enough that Madeline flinched. I walked to the sideboard against the wall. I picked up a blue folder. It wasn't the silver envelope Evan had given me. I was saving the originals for the lawyers. This was a copy, a presentation I had prepared just for them. I walked back to the table. I dropped the folder in the center, right on top of Madeline's investment brochure. It hit the table with a slap that sounded like a gavel. "Before we talk about the house," I said, my voice steady and cold, "and before we talk about my mental state, I want you to explain these." "What is this?" my father asked, looking at the folder with disdain. "Open it," I said. My mother reached out, her hand trembling slightly. She flipped the cover open. The first page was the photo of the text message thread between her and Madeline. "If it is under $200,000, it is barely worth the legal fees." I watched the color drain from her face. It was instantaneous. She went from flushed with fake concern to a ghostly ashen gray. What she stammered, "Where did you get this? Keep reading," I said. My father leaned over. He saw the next page. The bank login attempts, the IP address from Madeline's apartment. He looked up at Madeline. Madeline wasn't looking at the folder. She was looking at me, and her eyes were wide with terror. "Zoe," she said, her voice high and breathless. I can explain. This is a misunderstanding. I was trying to check the balance to help you budget. I didn't know the password, so I tried to reset it to help you." "You tried to reset it to help me?" I asked. "By sending the recovery email to yourself, I watched them crumble. It wasn't a loud explosion. It was a structural failure. The facade of the loving family, the mask of the concerned friends, it all dissolved, revealing the greedy, panicked strangers underneath. And the guardianship petition I asked, pointing to the draft document on the third page, was that to help me too? Was declaring me incompetent part of the pampering package? Madeline along with the bath salts." My father stood up. His face was red. "You have been spying on us," he accused. "This is illegal. You hacked Madeline's phone." "No, Dad," I said. "I didn't hack anything. You were just sloppy. You were so sure I was a stupid, grieving widow that you didn't even bother to close the back door when you were plotting to sell my house. You were so sure I was weak that you didn't think I would check the logs." I leaned over the table, placing my hands flat on the wood. "Evan knew," I said. The name hit them like a physical blow. "He saw you." "Madeline," I said. "He saw you steal the money from the drawer. He was dying. He couldn't speak, but he saw you, and he told me. I looked at my mother, and he heard you. Mom, he heard you waiting for him to die so you could avoid probate." I picked up the folder and closed it. "So here's the situation," I said. "You aren't going to manage my money, you aren't going to sell my house, and you are certainly not going to be my guardians." I looked at the door. "Take your lasagna, take your bath salts, and get out of my house." "Zoe." "Wait," my mother pleaded, standing up, tears streaming down her face, real tears this time, tears of fear. "We are your family. We made a mistake. We were just scared." "No," I said. "You weren't scared. You were hungry." I walked to the front door and threw it open. The sunlight poured in, bright and unforgiving. "Leave," I said, "before I call the police and report the theft of $2,500. I have the serial numbers of the bills. Madeline." Evan wrote them down. It was a bluff he hadn't written down the serial numbers, but Madeline didn't know that. She went pale. She grabbed her purse and practically ran for the door. My parents followed, moving slower, looking at me with a mixture of shock and hatred. My father stopped at the threshold. "You are making a mistake," he said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "You are going to be all alone. Zoe, you will have no one." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had checked the transmission of his car rather than attend the funeral of the man I loved. "I would rather be alone," I said, "than be surrounded by vultures." He stepped out. I slammed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I leaned my back against the wood, listening to the sound of their engines starting, the sound of their retreat. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the empty, terrifying silence of the last week. It was the silence of a fortress after the siege has been broken. I slid down to the floor. my legs finally giving way. I sat on the cool tile of the foyer. I picked up the phone. I dialed a number I had memorized from Evan's papers. Harper Sloane's office. A voice answered. "Hi," I said, my voice steady and strong. "This is Zoe Owens, Evan's wife. You might think that slamming the door in their faces was the end of it. You might think that my parents and Madeline, shamed by the revelation of their theft, would retreat into the shadows and leave me to grieve in peace. But you would be wrong. Predators do not give up just because they have been spotted. They simply change their angle of attack. 3 days after I kicked them out, they returned. They did not come with casseroles this time. They came with a demand for a family mediation, my father had texted, saying that I was hysterical and misinterpreting innocent actions, and that we needed to sit down like adults to repair the damage before I did something I would regret. They thought they were giving me a second chance to fall back into line. They thought they were walking into a negotiation. They did not know they were walking into an arraignment. I let them in. I led them to the dining room table, which I had cleared completely. There were no flowers this time, no coasters, just a stark, polished wood surface and a thick, black accordion folder sitting in the center. They sat down, looking wary but self-righteous. Madeline had abandoned her soft, sympathetic look for a stiff, professional demeanor. My mother looked aggrieved, clutching her handbag as if she were the victim of a terrible crime. "We just want to clear the air." "Zoe," my father began, his voice measuring every syllable, "you made some very serious accusations the other day. We want to show you that your grief is clouding your judgment." I did not say a word. I simply opened the black folder. I began to deal the papers onto the table like cards in a high-stakes poker game. "First, the server logs. Here is the digital footprint," I said, sliding the paper toward Madeline. "It shows a login attempt to my Vanguard account at 3:14 in the afternoon on October 12th. The IP address traces back to your router." Madeline's face went pale, but she tried to pivot. "Zoe, I told you, I was just trying to help you organize." I cut her off with the next paper. "And here," I said, "is the photograph Evan took of you." I slid the glossy photo across the table. It was blurry, taken from a low angle from the bed, but it was unmistakable. It showed Madeline standing at the china cabinet, her hand deep inside the drawer where the firefighter's cash envelope had been. "Evan saw you," I said, my voice flat and hard. He was paralyzed by tumors, but his eyes worked fine. "He watched you count the money. He watched you put half of it in your purse." Madeline gasped. She looked at the photo, then at me. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of a cornered animal. "If I needed it," she stammered, her voice cracking. "My firm is in trouble. Zoe, I was going to pay it back. I swear, I was just borrowing it until my bonus came through. I only wanted to help you manage the big money so I could take my commission and fix my mess. I did it for us. For us," I repeated. "You stole from a dying man's charity fund for us." My father slammed his hand on the table. "Enough," he shouted. "So she borrowed some money. She is your best friend. She is family. You are going to ruin a 20-year friendship over a few $1,000s. This is what I mean. Zoe, you are petty. You are not seeing the big picture." "The big picture," I said. "You mean this?" I slapped the next document onto the table. It was the email thread between my mother and the lawyer, the one I had found in my old Yahoo account. Subject: scheduling emergency guardianship hearing. "And this," I added, placing the draft petition next to it. My mother flinched as if I had struck her. She stared at the words, "Emergency Temporary Guardianship," printed in bold at the top of the page. "You were not trying to help me." "Mom," I said, "you were trying to own me. You were drafting this while Evan was still breathing. You were going to stand in front of a judge and tell him I was insane so you could get control of the insurance payout." My father's face turned a violent shade of red. He stood up, pointing a shaking finger at me. "That man poisoned you," he roared. "Evan, he did this. He filled your head with these lies. He turned you against your own blood. We were a happy family before he came along with his blue-collar chip on his shoulder. He was jealous of us. Zoe, he wanted to isolate you. I looked at my father. I looked at the vein throbbing in his neck. For 33 years, I had been afraid of that anger. I had spent my life trying to placate him, trying to be the perfect daughter so he wouldn't raise his voice. But today, looking at him, I didn't feel fear. I felt nothing but pity. He didn't poison me. Dad, I said calmly, he just turned on the lights. You are the ones who have been feeding me poison my whole life. You told me love was conditional. You told me family was about appearance and assets. Evan taught me that love is about protection. I reached into the folder and pulled out the final document, the one Harper Sloan had finalized just yesterday. And because he loved me, I said, he made sure you could never hurt me again. I slid the document toward them. This is the trust agreement, I said. Evan updated the beneficiary on every single policy 3 days before he died. The life insurance, the house, the savings. It is all in here. I watched as my father's eyes scanned the page. I watched him read the clause that Harper had affectionately named the Caldwell Clause. Section 4, Paragraph B. No funds, assets, or properties held within this trust may be accessed, managed, or dispersed by any member of the Caldwell family or by Madeline Price. Any petition by these parties to gain control via guardianship or power of attorney shall result in an immediate and permanent freezing of assets to be overseen by a court-appointed third-party trustee. My father stopped reading. He slumped back into his chair. He understood. Even if they succeeded in declaring me incompetent, even if they dragged my name through the mud and got a judge to sign a guardianship order, they would get nothing. The money was locked in a vault that they did not have the key to. It would sit there, untouchable, while a stranger managed it for me. There is no payday. Dad, I said, the well is dry. Madeline wiped her eyes. Her makeup smeared. She tried one last, desperate gambit. But Zoe, she whined, her voice trembling. We are not just talking about money. We are talking about you. You are not well. Look at you. You are hallucinating conspiracies. You need help. We can still file the petition. Not for the money, but for your safety. The court will see that you are unstable. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. I thought you might say that. I said, I pulled out the last 2 sheets of paper. This is a sworn affidavit from Dr. Evans, the chief of oncology at Kestrel Point. I said, he attests that I have been fully lucid, capable, and rational throughout my husband's illness. I placed another paper on top of it, and this is a statement from Nora, the hospice nurse, and Captain Miller. They both signed statements yesterday confirming that I provided exemplary care for Evan and that I am perfectly sane. I leaned forward. If you file that petition, Madeline, I will countersue for defamation, abuse of process, and fraud. And I will use these affidavits, along with the evidence of your theft, to make sure you never work in finance again. The room went dead silent. It was over. The chess match was finished. They had no moves left. The money was gone. The legal angle was blocked. The emotional manipulation had failed. I stood up. I have spoken to my lawyer, Harper Sloan. I said, from this moment on, you are not to contact me. You are not to come to this house. You are not to call my phone. Any communication goes through him. If you show up here again, I will have you arrested for trespassing and harassment. But my mother whispered, her voice broken, Zoe, we are your parents. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had prioritized a car transmission over her daughter's grief. No, I said, you are my relatives. There is a difference. I pointed to the door. Get out. They stood up slowly. They looked older, smaller. My father didn't look at me. He stared at the floor, defeated not by emotion, but by the ironclad legal contract on the table. Madeline wouldn't meet my eyes. She grabbed her purse and hurried out, the click of her heels sounding like gunfire in the hallway. My mother paused at the door. She looked back at me, and for a second, I saw a flicker of actual loss. "We just didn't want you to be alone," she said softly. "I am not alone. Mom." I said, "I have never been less alone." She turned and walked out. I closed the heavy oak door. I turned the deadbolt. Click. I leaned my forehead against the wood. I expected to crash. I expected to slide down to the floor and sob until my throat bled. But the tears didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange, buoyant lightness. The air in the house felt different. It was no longer thick with the pressure of their expectations or the smog of their judgment. It was just air. I walked back to the living room. I looked at the spot where Evan's hospital bed had been. "We did it," I whispered. 6 months later, the house is painted a soft blue now. I finally finished the trim on the porch that Evan and I had started. I did it myself, learning how to use the miter saw from videos on the internet. I went back to work, but not to the ICU. I transferred to the palliative care unit. I help families navigate the end. I help them have the conversations that matter. And when I see the sharks circling because they always do, I help the patients lock the doors. I see Miles every Sunday. He drives his beat-up truck over, and we eat burgers on the grill. He isn't Evan, and he doesn't try to be, but he is family. And the guys from Station 42. They never left. They are the uncles to the children I might have one day. They are the ones who fix my gutters and check my tires. I used a portion of the insurance money, the money Madeline so desperately wanted to manage, to start a foundation. The Evan Owens Fund. We provide emergency financial grants to the families of first responders who are dealing with terminal illness. We pay the mortgages, so the widows don't have to worry about the sharks. I sat on the porch swing this morning, drinking my coffee, watching the sun come up over the neighborhood. I lost my husband. I lost my parents. I lost my best friend. By all accounts, I should be empty. But as I watched the sunrise, I realized that my life wasn't empty. It had simply been renovated. I had stripped down the rotting drywall and the shaky foundation, and I had built something new, something solid, something that would hold up against the storm. I was Zoe Owens, and I was still standing. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was a journey of pain, betrayal, but ultimately, reclaiming my own power. If you've made it this far, please leave a comment down below telling me where you are listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel around the world. And if you want to support the channel, please make sure to subscribe to Kate Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this message of strength with more people. Stay strong, and remember, you are the captain of your own ship.